we found the ledgers. Hidden in a nondescript basement in Ho Chi Minh City, our team uncovered a digital paper trail involving 1,000 ghost companies. A shell network so complex, it took the Vietnamese government a decade to map. We aren't looking at a simple business failure. We are looking at a $12.5 billion extraction. To put that in perspective, that is roughly 3% of Vietnam's entire GDP. It is enough cash to build 15 Burj Khalifas, vanished from a single bank. This wasn't a bank robbery, it was a decade-long siege on a nation's treasury. And the architect behind it? She didn't use a gun, a mask, or a digital virus. She used a superpower the world has never seen in this magnitude. They called her the Ghost of Saigon. By the time the central bank realized the vault was empty, she already owned the skyline. The evidence we pulled from the 2024 court transcripts reveals a terrifying level of precision. We traced the wire transfers from the Saigon Commercial Bank (SCB) to a labyrinth of offshore accounts that stretched from the busy streets of District 1 to the silent tax havens of the Cayman Islands. This was a heist performed in broad daylight, under the noses of auditors who were paid to stay blind. Every transaction was a ghost. Every loan was a lie. We've spent months dissecting the appraisal fraud documents that allowed a market stall vendor to outsmart the most powerful bankers in Southeast Asia. This is not just a story of greed, it is a masterclass in systemic exploitation. Tonight we follow the money. We go inside the Van Thin Phat empire to see how Truong My Lan turned a legitimate real estate firm into a $12.5 billion vacuum. We show you the shadow department that manufactured thousands of fake identities to signature stamp the destruction of a bank. You've heard rumors of the collapse. You've seen the news reports of the death sentence. But you haven't seen the blueprints of how she actually pulled it off. This is the autopsy of a $12.5 billion ghost story. Act 1. The setup, the origin of the Necromancer. Every global empire, no matter how grand, begins in the dirt. For Truong My Lan, the journey to becoming the wealthiest property tycoon in Vietnam didn't start in a boardroom. It started at a market stall in Ben Thanh, the oldest and most chaotic market in Ho Chi Minh City. Born in 1956 to a family of Teochew heritage from Guangdong, China, Lan was the daughter of a Chinese entrepreneur. While other children were playing, she was standing beside her mother, hawking cosmetics and hair accessories to locals and tourists alike. She was a nobody, just another face in the crowded stalls of Saigon. But even then, we can see the early flickers of her superpower, Collateral Necromancy. Lan didn't just sell lipstick, she sold a vision of luxury in a country that was still recovering from decades of war. She understood that value isn't just about the product, it's about the perception. The turning point came in 1986 with Doi Moi, Vietnam's aggressive shift from a rigid state-run economy to a market-oriented one. It was a Wild West era of liberalization, and while others were hesitant, Lan was hungry. In 1992, she founded Van Thin Phat VTP alongside her husband, Eric Chu Napki, a savvy investor from Hong Kong. They started with restaurants and hotels, but Lan's eyes were always on the skyline. She realized that in a rapidly developing nation, land was the ultimate currency. But there was a problem. Real estate is a slow game. You buy land, you wait years for permits, you build, and only then do you see a profit. For a woman with Lan's ambition, waiting was a death sentence. She needed a Trojan horse, a mechanism that would give her unlimited access to capital without the oversight of the state. That Trojan horse was the Saigon Commercial Bank, SCB. In 2011, 3 small, beleaguered banks were facing total collapse. The Vietnamese central bank coordinated a merger to save the financial system, and Truong My Lan was invited to the table as an advisor. It was a masterstroke of institutional seduction. On paper, Lan was just a prominent businesswoman helping her country. In reality, she was performing a silent coup. Vietnamese law is strict. No single individual can own more than 5% of a bank's shares. It is a firewall designed to prevent the very catastrophe Lan was about to engineer. But Lan was a master of shadow proxying. She didn't buy the bank in her name. She bought it through a ghost army of more than 24 middlemen and offshore shell companies. By the time the merger was complete in 2012, Truong My Lan, the former market vendor, secretly controlled over 91.5% of the bank's shares. She didn't just have a seat at the table. She owned the table, the room, and the vault. She had achieved the impossible. She had turned Vietnam's largest commercial bank into her personal ATM. The stage was set. The ghost of Saigon now had the keys to the kingdom, and she was about to use her superpower to extract $12.5 billion from the pockets of the Vietnamese people. Act 2. The turn. The mechanism of the extraction. Once Lan had total control of the vault, the real work began. This wasn't a bank anymore. It was a high-speed extraction machine designed to satisfy a single appetite. We performed a forensic sweep of the records from 2012 to 2022, and the data is staggering. Over 10 years, SCB issued more than 2,500 loans. We traced the destination of that capital, and we found that a staggering 93% of the bank's total lending went to exactly one person, Truong My Lan. To move $12.5 billion without triggering every red flag in the global financial system, Lan perfected her signature move, Collateral Necromancy. Within the bank, we uncovered a unit that didn't exist on any official organizational chart. We call it the Shadow Processing Department. This wasn't a group of bankers. It was a factory of forgers. Their only job was to manufacture fake loan applications at an industrial scale. Every time Lan identified a new prestige property she wanted to acquire, the machine would conjure a new ghost company out of thin air to act as the borrower. We found the records of thousands of these shell companies. They were often named after flowers, auspicious numbers, or meaningless strings of characters. To the regulators, they looked like independent businesses. To us, they were just buckets used to carry stolen water. Lan used the identities of her employees, distant relatives, and even poor street vendors to sign as the directors of these firms. For a few $100s, a market vendor would sign a document that made them the legal owner of a $50 million debt they could never hope to pay. But even a ghost bank needs collateral. This is where the necromancy turned into a masterclass in appraisal fraud. Lan would take a dead asset, perhaps a plot of disputed land in District 1, or a half-finished concrete shell of a hotel, and have her own corrupt appraisal firms value it at
1,000% to 2,000% of its actual worth.
In our deep dive, we found a single undeveloped lot that was used as collateral for 20 different loans simultaneously. By the time the ink was dry, that one piece of dirt was worth billions on the bank's books, even though it remained a literal hole in the ground. She was essentially printing money by lying about the value of the earth itself.
How did she keep the secret for a decade? In the world of high-stakes crime, the best security isn't a vault door. It's a person who knows how to look the other way. Even a ghost needs protection. We uncovered the bribe logs that kept the central bank in the dark. The most damning evidence? A series of styrofoam boxes delivered to the lead inspector of the State Bank of Vietnam. Inside those boxes wasn't food. It was $5.2 million in cash, the largest individual bribe ever recorded in the history of the country. For 10 years, Lan didn't just own the bank. She owned the people whose only job was to stop people like her. She had built a system where the inspectors were just another layer of her shell company network. She was extracting nearly $100 million every single month. We traced the wire transfers as they moved from SCB through 3 layers of buffer companies in 24 hours, and finally into private offshore accounts. She wasn't just a thief. She was a parasite that had grown larger than its host. But as we've seen in the files of Carlos Lader and George Jung, the more massive the empire, the more catastrophic the eventual crack.
Act 3.
The fallout, the death of the Necromancer. The ghost of Saigon had one fatal flaw: institutional arrogance. Like the art middleman who threw a Picasso in a dumpster out of panic, Truong My Lan believed that if you become large enough, you become the state itself. She stopped operating in the shadows. She began building the Times Square of Saigon, a massive, garish monument to her ego in the heart of the city. She believed that because she owned the bank, the inspectors, and the skyline, she was untouchable. She was wrong. In late 2022, the mechanism began to overheat. The real estate market in Vietnam began to cool, and the interest payments on the billions in fake loans became impossible to cover, even for a bank as large as SCB. We uncovered that, by September of that year, Lan was frantically moving assets offshore, sensing that the signal blackout she had enjoyed for a decade was finally failing. The end came with the suddenness of a guillotine. On a humid night in October 2022, Vietnamese special forces launched Operation Saigon Clean. This wasn't a standard police raid. It was a military-grade extraction. They didn't just arrest Lan at her luxury villa. They raided every Van Thin Phat office simultaneously, seizing servers, ledgers, and the ghost processing documents that proved the decade-long heist. The arrest triggered an economic earthquake. As news of Lan's capture hit the streets, the illusion of SCB's stability vanished. We watched the footage of thousands of Vietnamese citizens, the very people whose savings Lan had used as her personal slush fund, lining up outside bank branches in a desperate attempt to withdraw their life savings. The ghost of Saigon had vanished, and she had taken the nation's trust with her. To prevent a total systemic collapse of the Vietnamese economy, the central bank had to step in and effectively seize SCB, a move that cost the state billions in liquidity. The trial, which began in early 2024, was a televised reckoning. It was unlike any financial trial in history. There were 86 defendants, including central bank officials and Lan's own family members. The government brought in 6 tons of physical evidence. We're talking about millions of pages of forged loan applications, fraudulent appraisals, and bribe logs. The prosecution didn't just tell a story of theft. They performed a forensic autopsy on a dead bank. During the proceedings, the ghost finally spoke. But she didn't offer a confession. She offered a justification. She claimed she was saving the bank she had merged. She believed her collateral necromancy, her ability to manufacture value out of thin air, was a service to the country. It was the ultimate display of her fatal flaw. She couldn't see the crime because she believed she was the economy. In April 2024, the judge handed down a sentence that sent a shockwave through the global financial community: death. In a world where billion-dollar fraudsters usually serve 10 years in a low-security facility, the Vietnamese state chose the ultimate penalty. For Truong My Lan, the woman who rose from a market stall selling hair ties to the queen of the Saigon skyline, the collapse was total. She remains on death row today, a prisoner of the very system she thought she had outsmarted. Her $12.5 billion empire has been dismantled. Her ghosts have been exorcised, and her name has become a dark warning to any architect who thinks they can build a throne on top of a nation's treasury. The ghost of Saigon is no longer a mogul. She is a ghost of the system's past. This investigation proves our core philosophy: the evidence never lies. Whether you are scaling a 5-story museum wall or scaling a national banking system, the higher you climb on a foundation of lies, the more certain your fall. Lan had the superpower to resurrect dead assets, but she couldn't resurrect the trust she destroyed. The skyline of Ho Chi Minh City still stands, but its most prominent architect is gone. We followed the money to the end of the line, and it led straight to a cold cell. The vault is empty, the ledgers are closed, and the ghost of Saigon has finally run out of time. This is the Audit Files. Subscribe and follow the money.